Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from Queens, New York, we are here for episode 8 of the podcast. This season, we're pulling back the curtain of the grind of betting an entire NFL season. With an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows, each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Analytics don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
All right. We are here for week 8. Took a little hiatus last week. Had some things going on, a little bit of travel as well, but we're back and better than ever. We have a couple interesting matchups this week. We're going to talk a little bit about Survivor. Obviously, if you're still in it, we have plenty of options this week and kind of starting to navigate, that future equity that we always talk about. We'll look a little bit at the futures markets and kind of just get a sense for, what teams are starting to become a little bit interesting and perhaps how you can actually play something that you are considering. In that example of rather than bet something in the futures market and tie up your capital, perhaps we can find an alternative way for you to play that. And then of course, we'll get into some game picks as well. All right, let's jump right into Survivor. I think lots of interesting options this week. You have almost a touchdown favorite for, just about every team on the board. So it's a little bit of an interesting betting week where we're trying to figure out, how good these teams actually are. Some teams coming off of weird performances with all the weather games we had last week. I know we didn't have an episode to discuss this, but we had a lot of winds, had some rain, really, really poor weather in that Jets game. The Miami game was supposed to be a, crazy weather's game, and it ended up being kind of okay. So just a bunch of weird outcomes last week, and we're going to try to start to, navigate that to how we're going to actually project these teams for week 8. So thinking about Survivor, looking at a couple teams right now, I think, the first ones that stand out, obviously, are the elite teams, right? Well, we have Buffalo and Philly, which in general we have question marks about whether they actually are elite teams. Philly with the offense, Buffalo with the defense. But with the matchups they have, I think you'll see a lot of teams kind of go that way. A lot of entries will go that way. Again, I've been an advocate to save these teams. I don't think this is the spot to use Buffalo, although they are coming off the bye. I'll get into that game a little bit more in a couple minutes. But Philly, right, we just saw this matchup where the Giants beat Philly straight up. And now Philly's hosting Jackson Dart and company. Giants are a tough team to figure out for me. I don't think anyone other than their front four is particularly good. Yet they're kind of finding ways to be frisky, win games, be competitive in games. Probably should have won that Broncos game last week. Missed kick aside, right? Broncos scored 33 points in the fourth quarter. That doesn't happen too often. So we'll try to spend some more time figuring out this Giants squad, but for now I think it's kind of an avoid, which leaves you with, obviously, if you still have Indy, right, they're 14-point favorites against the Colts. I have to imagine if you still have Indy, you have quite a bit of leverage against the pool. They are the biggest favorite on the board, but most people have used Indy already, especially in some of these weeks where you had, crazy outlier events like the Arizona week, which, we don't have to relive, or even Green Bay that same week. It's teams have entries have used a lot of these teams already, and when you're talking about the Colts, a lot of the entries used the Colts during those weeks, and that's what has kind of allowed them to get away with some of those big events that took out a lot of the pool. So if you still have Indy, I would again advocate to use them. 14-point favorites. I mean, it's hard for us to see a world where to the Tennessee Titans, go on the road and win. But most people have already used that, so I won't make that, my official entry. I think you'll see a lot of people use the Falcons, right? The Falcons are hosting Miami. Miami Dolphins in disarray right now. Mike McDaniel has seemed kind of really curt and aloof at the same time in his press conferences. He has clearly lost the locker room. Tua Tagovailoa is playing just about as bad as I've ever seen him play. The defense can't stop anything. Everything about the team is very uninspired, and gives an opportunity for Atlanta, who needs a bounce back win after kind of not showing up on Sunday Night Football against the 49ers. It's a great opportunity for Atlanta to come back and get a win. I do think it's going to be heavily used in the pool, but that's probably where I'm going to go with my entry. I really don't want to back Michael Penix and company later on in the season. This is a defense that I somewhat trust. I think they are better than an average defense, right? They're probably a top 15 unit, but a few question marks on the sustainability of that defense. And then when it comes to Michael Penix, I don't think he's good. I think he, is struggling past his first read. He's pretty athletic, but is not considered a mobile quarterback. So just a lot of what they do, that offense is for years really has struggled. And, we're even almost starting the conversation of, should they start Kirk again? Which just Atlanta as an organization is horrific. But all that aside, I think Atlanta is a good look this week against Miami. I have a hard time seeing them lose that game. And then we'll look over at the New England Patriots. We used the Patriots in some entries last week against the Titans. Again, if you've made it this far and you kind of got on the Drake May train a little earlier than others, you've probably used New England, and that's what's gotten you here. But again, if you haven't, I'd say that's a pretty strong play as well. Why I'm personally a little bit concerned, but I guess I'll give you why I'm concerned, but why maybe you shouldn't be. Right. Drake May has not gone up against a defense of the caliber of Cleveland. Cleveland's pass rush is obviously much better than the other teams that they've gone up against. I think we're going to see regression from the Patriots. It's going to come. I don't know that it's going to come this week, but this offense is not going to play this well for the entirety of the season. It's just generally doesn't go this way. I do think Drake May is playing like a top 10 quarterback. And, if we did a re-rank at the end of the year and he was firmly a top 10 quarterback talent-wise, I also wouldn't be surprised. But I think they're kind of getting away with a lot. And this is my point about maybe why it doesn't matter. And because he is that good, he's getting pressured and sacked at an alarming rate. Drake May has been sacked the same amount of times as Justin Fields, even though Justin Fields has missed some time with, series and games and stuff. But if you've seen how often Justin Fields and the Jets have been under pressure, Drake May has been under pressure a similar amount. So that makes what he's doing offensively even that much more impressive, as they're getting all these negative plays in the game, and it's kind of not even mattering to a pretty efficient offense. So interested in the Patriots. Personally not going to use it, but this is an interesting matchup for can he succeed against pressure as much as he has been so far this year? And maybe is it really that the offensive line is letting this up and they're letting subpar defenses get to him, which only means that a better defense than the Browns will get to him at a rate that he can't overcome? That's possible. Or, perhaps Drake May is really just that good at avoiding pressure, getting the ball out, and dealing with negative plays. So big litmus test for them, I think. That being said, Cleveland's offense, Cleveland's home road splits for their defense is not good. Their defense performs a lot better at home. So being on the road, I think, again, a bit of an advantage. I was surprised to see some buyback on Cleveland, honestly. In this game, right, this opened around +7 for Cleveland, and you can find some cheap 7 minus 104, 105, and there's certainly a couple -6.5 still around in the market. I'm a little bit surprised to see that. I haven't gotten around to making a play on it yet, but surprised to see that, just given that Dylan Gabriel looks incompetent. He doesn't really have much going on. And any game that the Browns need to throw the ball 50 times to try to be competitive is just not a game that they're going to win. So stay away from me, a little bit of a weird one. And then last game that I think people will use is Baltimore. We'll talk about this game in a few seconds as well, but Baltimore -6.5 out there with. By the time this podcast comes out, we might actually have confirmation on Lamar Jackson. All signs point to he's going to play, but at the same time, reports coming out that the hamstring injury is not fully healed. He's not prepared to go. So we'll see what the next couple practice reports look like, right? As far as the Wednesday practice report goes, he was a limited participant. So he's gearing up, but I'm a little bit concerned with how the Ravens are going to be without him, and I'm a little bit concerned with how he's going to look. I guess we can kind of pivot right into some of our futures discussion right now, but we'll close off that segment by confirming my pick this week is going to be the Atlanta Falcons. But again, if you haven't used the Colts yet, or haven't used the Patriots, I wouldn't hate that play. All right, we'll discuss a little bit about the futures market right now. Speaking of Lamar Jackson and Baltimore, right, we're kind of seeing them lingering just below Pittsburgh in market as far as to win the AFC North. You can find about a +145, +150 around in market. This is an interesting case because a lot of people are immediately jumping on the Ravens, right? Especially after Joe Flacco and the Bengals beat Pittsburgh. We know that Pittsburgh is not a world-beating team, right? Despite who wins this division, it's Baltimore that I'd go to bat with to win multiple playoff games versus Pittsburgh is a first-round exit, no matter what, in my opinion. There isn't really a matchup that they'll be able to get, especially when you're playing in the AFC. Winning that division is not going to give them a massive advantage because that fifth seed team is going to be, pretty good. So we'll see what that shakes up to be like. But that being said, I think a lot of people are seeing the same thing where I'm not ready to back Pittsburgh as going to win this division. They have a more difficult schedule probably than Baltimore does down the stretch. So the immediate thought is to pivot to let's bet Baltimore. And even, personally, that was my first thought. But now we're looking into it. Now we kind of wait a little bit, hear about some of this Lamar news, looking into the defense, right? Roquan Smith is back. So the defense should be starting to improve. But despite getting some guys back, the secondary has still been pretty questionable. Marlon Humphreys, he seems to care a little bit more about podcasting and tweeting than being good at football these days. So good for him, I guess. But Baltimore's defense is very suspect right now. I'm not 100% sold on it, and I'm not 100% sold on Lamar. I've said it time and time again. Lamar is one of the best football players I've ever seen. He is potentially on any given night the best player in the league, but has not looked like that so far this year. And I don't know if that's because he has some other lingering injury. I'm not sure if something else is going on with the offense in general, but Lamar has not performed at the ability that he can. So I'd like to see what he looks like first. And with these, markets reopening at Baltimore 9.5 wins while they're sitting at 1, you're looking at a scenario where they almost have to run the table. And I don't think I'm ready to go to bat with Baltimore like that, especially with question marks in this game where we're not even 100% sure he's going to play. This is a difficult matchup in that scenario because the one thing Chicago can do is score, right? And if Baltimore's defense is not ready to play and they're not up to par, I don't see how Ben Johnson doesn't carve them up. So if you have a scenario where you have a banged up Lamar that isn't able to perform well on offense, or an even worse scenario where you have another Cooper Rush or Snoop Huntley sighting, you're not going to be able to score. And if you're going up against a Chicago team that, while their defense is probably bottom 3, their offense is pretty decent. I mean, it's closer to average, but it's not that bad. So especially from a scheme perspective, right? We know Ben Johnson is going to be able to, to cook something up, and we know that Baltimore's weakness is in the secondary, which means, Chicago can put up a bunch of points really fast. And even when the Ravens are playing well, we kind of know them to have a hard time coming back in games just because their style predicates so much on holding the ball, running the ball efficiently, but creating these long possessions that end in touchdowns. So when they have to come back, they've really had a hard time in this Lamar Jackson era. So I'm a little hesitant to start backing Baltimore, and I actually would lean towards the under 9.5 wins on their season win total. This doesn't mean that we should go and back Pittsburgh, but it's more to say I think we're going to create some more opportunities down the line where we're going to have games that are so heavily leveraged, right? Where Baltimore and Pittsburgh haven't played each other yet. So if they're neck and neck come, those matchups later down the line, right? You just play the game, right? Don't tie up your capital in a Baltimore division bet when you have so many question marks where you can just wait. Bet Pittsburgh when they play Baltimore, right? If Lamar is back and Lamar is not 100%, how much of a credit or I guess a debit in this case, right? How much are the books going to take down that Baltimore number, right? If Lamar is in and he says he's healthy and he's just not performing as good as he can, what's that Baltimore number going to look like versus Pittsburgh? And maybe will you find value? Because at the end of the day, if you think that Pittsburgh can win this division, you're going to tell me that they're going to beat Baltimore at least once. And you can probably just bet that game rather than, invest your capital in the futures market. So that being said, I will bet a little bit of under 9.5 for Baltimore. Nothing crazy for me, but I'm interested in kind of taking a bit of a fade on what this team is going to look like when they come out. And yeah, you know what? If Baltimore looks great on Sunday and Lamar blows me out of the water, well, then you can pick up some divisional futures then, or, just think about how you're going to end up betting Baltimore down the stretch. Look for Baltimore's leverage games. So we'll talk about that next week, right? Maybe I'll eat my words and everyone's fine. But we'll talk about that next week as far as what we're going to do with Baltimore. Other teams on the rise, Kansas City Chiefs, they're back. Offense looks great. Rashee Rice plugged right in. I think it's only going to get better. We talked about this last time last episode where I felt like the Chiefs were kind of a week away. And I think this was that week. They got everything together offensively. They maybe even peaking a little early, but they are going to be able to play their offense, right? They're going to be able to pass on anybody at any time. The real question is, can they run the ball as efficiently as they need to in order to, again, do a similar thing where, they want to create long, sustained possessions that end in touchdowns. You need to have an efficient running game, but it always helps to be able to carve up a defense through the pass. Andy Reid has been doing this for multiple years, so I'm not really concerned with them offensively. And all this to say, right, we took some Denver Broncos futures at the beginning of the year, trying to play on the difficulties of the Chiefs' schedule at the beginning of the season, and that has worked out, right? Where the Chiefs, they were under 500, and they had some difficult games that they ended up losing a couple of those matchups that we were expecting them to. Denver, on the other hand, has run into quite a few issues. We don't need to relive how many one possession games Denver has lost, or if they lost that Giants game, I don't know. I mean, they absolutely should have. They played horribly. Bo Nix is probably not an NFL quarterback, but I digress. Long story short, I've sold those positions. So part of the reason that we talked about week one is you doing this on a prediction market or an exchange, right? Trying to dictate, let the market dictate what they think the pricing is going to be, rather than, take a bet on a book and wait for a cash out option, right? Which I would advocate. Don't ever cash out. If you are not cashing out for money that is going to change your life, do not cash out. And if you are betting more than your means and you need to win that bet, then you're betting too much. So take my advice. Don't ever cash out. Let your bet ride. And if you need the money, don't bet it. And if the cash out is something that's going to change your life, then go ahead. Go home and change your life. So that being said, we are selling shares of this Denver Broncos position and getting out of that position we were looking for an opportunity to either buy Chiefs or sell Broncos. And we've reached that inflection point in the season right now here coming into week 8 where I think we're going to see the Chiefs start to kind of run the table. So rather than pick up some Chiefs bets, right, they're pretty cheap in a market. Or pretty expensive in market, I should say, to bet them to win the division. I really don't see any value in doing that. So we got, I think, like a 15% gain on the Broncos positions. I mean, if they won a couple of those games, we definitely would have been more live and we would have had a more interesting position to play with. Had that Indy game come through or that Charger game come through for us, we would have been able to play this a little differently. But we sold out of those positions for a minimal gain, and that's what it's all about, right? ROI is the most important thing. All right, we'll move along into a couple bets I have for this weekend, and I'll start right here. This is a disgusting one, just to be frank, right? We are looking at the New York Jets taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is a good. This is kind of a good way to start to talk a little bit about market ratings. And how you're looking at teams, that are nosediving or teams that are really ascending, right? Where you have the New York Jets, who are slowly becoming one of, if not the worst team in football. They're going to be moving most likely, although Aaron Glenn is trying to be a super secretive guy. And he says that if he doesn't tell us who is starting between Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor, then he's going to gain an advantage over his opponent because they won't know who to prepare for. I'm glad he thinks that way, and I'm glad he thinks he's doing something, but expect to see Tyrod Taylor. I hope they play Tyrod Taylor all 4 quarters. Justin Fields, he needs a timeout. I don't think he's this bad in general. I don't think he's starting quarterback caliber, but I don't think he's this bad. So I think he needs a timeout. He needs to sit down and kind of go back to the drawing board. I hope they go to Tyrod, and I mean I'm expecting them to, but I hope he gets a full start. So where we're getting at here, right, is the Jets are at the absolute bottom of their rating right now. The Jets are as low as they're ever going to be, and the Bengals have some positive sentiment because Joe Flacco kind of injected some life into this offense. This is still the worst defense in the NFL, right? They're the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL. But the offense could be somewhat average given that they have elite weapons at wide receiver and a quarterback who's willing at least to throw the ball. You're getting a lot of positive news where they said Joe Flacco didn't even know the playbook during that game. So now that he's had a week to prepare, it's going to get even better, which I'm not saying that that's bullshit, but perhaps it's something that's a little bit, just a little bit overplayed as far as a news story goes. I don't think that's particularly actionable, but a good site to use, and this is a recommendation, this is a site I actually use, is inpredictable.com. They just track market ratings for teams, and that's built on where they're being priced. So this is based on just where they're being priced in market. And we have the New York Jets, right, as the number 31 ranked team. The market's giving them a minus 7.2, so they are 7.2 points worse than an average team. And then we look at Cincy, who's a minus 4. So on a neutral, that would mean that Cincy should be favored by 3 points or 3.2 points over the Jets. Now they are home. We'll give them something for home field advantage. Remember, the average home field advantage in the NFL these days is only 1.7. Traditionally, this used to be a 3. It's 1.7. And some teams are even less than that. Matchups might dictate, something more or less. But Cincinnati, I can't really say is known for having a particularly impressive home field. And I don't think that people are running to come watch the Jets and the Joe Flacco revenge game again. But that being said, right, let's just say we give him a 1.5 points. That means that you would make Cincy hosting the Jets as 5.5 point favorites. But in market, we're getting 6.5. 6 being obviously one of the most key numbers in football. 3, 6, and 7. These are the numbers that your games land on most likely, and that makes them what we call key numbers. So having a game that by market should be rated at 5.5, and now you get through that key number of 6 to 6.5 creates value. Now, the question that we ask ourselves in this scenario is why? Why are they better? Is it because that Justin Fields to Tyrod Taylor is a 1-point downgrade? I don't think so. They continue to miss Wilson, right? Garrett Wilson. They don't really have weapons on the outside, but that was already baked into the number last week. They didn't have him last week. There is some rumblings that he might try to play. I know they're going to try to get him to practice. So far this week, he has not. But, again, when this podcast gets released, we'll see if any of that updates. And they'll likely also be without Sauce Gardner, who's concussed. All that to say, you have something that's baked into the line already. Obviously, you have one of the better quarterbacks in the league, but cornerbacks in the league, but a defense that really hasn't performed all that great. And Sauce Gardner, who is not worth 1 point to a point spread. These are not reasons why this should be 6.5. And at this point in the season, Justin Fields to Tyrod Taylor is an upgrade. So I don't see how you can make this 6.5. Yes, this is disgusting. There is many scenarios where Joe Flacco just throws it all over the Jets secondary and the Jets offense can't move the ball because of their own doings, not because Cincinnati's so good. That is entirely possible. We could see that. But from a pure numbers and market rating perspective, there's no world that the Jets should be 6.5 point underdogs to the Bengals, despite being on the road. We'll see how this game actually plays out, right? And that'll determine whether or not our CLV matters, right? If this game ends up getting bet down, or if we get some positive news on Garrett Wilson, maybe this comes back to 6, but 6.5 has to be the top. It's kind of like when you're trading a stock, right? We want to call the absolute bottom and we want to call the absolute top. This is the bottom of the barrel of ratings for the New York Jets, both on a seasonal perspective, unless we have another quarterback injury, and from a weekly points bet perspective. I don't see this getting to 7. I don't think there's any news that could come out that would push this to 7, and other than a freak injury to Tyrod Taylor or something, which has happened before when he got his lung punctured. So I can't say it won't happen, but the only thing that's going to really push this to 7 is something freaky like that. So this is the bottom. We're going to buy the Jets here. I'm not thrilled about it, but we are buying the Jets at 6.5 this week. And 2 other picks that I released in the Discord on Monday. I had Indianapolis and Tennessee over 45. This game is now at 47.5, and I still think you can bet the over. I can't imagine how this opened at 45. We made a larger wager on that when it came out on Monday, on Sunday night, I should say. But I'm very surprised that this was 45. This game, they already played each other, right? Indy and Tennessee, and Indy scored 41 points. I think the game was 41-20. So I don't see how Jonathan Taylor doesn't have a big game again. I don't see how the Colts kind of get whatever they want on offense. The offense is even more in sync than they were before. I mean, not that they've really missed a beat this year, but that was a bad opener. We hit it. And again, this is the value of joining the Discord. I love doing the show, and I thank everyone who tunes in and listens to what I have to say. But the most value you're going to get is in the Discord by where we are going to beat these lines in real time. You will get all of my bets as I release them, as I place them in real time. So join the Discord. The link is in the description of the podcast. It's also in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. Other bet that we also put out was Miami and Atlanta under 46.5. This is at 44.5 now. I don't think there's a ton of value anymore. 44.5 is a bit of a key number, but I don't see this going under that. Sorry, I don't see the market going under at this point. I think it's going to kind of finish here. We're gonna close around 44.5. So I would lean that way still. I'm not going to say that I wouldn't play it, but I again was surprised to see a 46.5 pop up for, despite how bad the Miami defense is, Atlanta can't really get in, they beat themselves, right? They can't get away from Penix's inability to really see the whole field. Their offense gets siloed too easily, and yeah, they have a pretty good defense. I don't see why, this isn't a big Bijan Robinson game where he kind of runs all over Miami, but they also, again, play that style of possession, keep the ball out of the other team's hands, right? The best offense is a good defense. The best defense is a good offense. And they try to play possession ball. 46.5 is too much. I don't think Miami's in a position to compete with Atlanta in that scenario. So those are my two picks that I released in the Discord. Anything else that I come up with, especially props, I usually tend to do a little bit later in the week. Make sure you jump in the Discord to get all of my picks in real time. And last but not least, we will move on over to our Sweet Gains Frozen Lock for Week 8. Sweet Gains is a protein ice cream providing a high protein and low calorie option to help you with your fitness goals. Without further ado, the Sweet Gains Frozen Lock for Week 8 is Dallas plus 3.5 against the Denver Broncos. A bit of a hold your nose play against what has been, quite the pass rush for the Denver Broncos. They are pressuring above 40%, which is, perhaps unsustainable and really, a serious test for this Dallas team. They handled the pressure from Green Bay quite well. Dak Prescott looked really good. Now, obviously, having both CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens healthy and integrated well into the offense, this is a top 5 offense. The fact that they're getting as much as they are out of Javonte Williams, the fact that the offensive line is performing much better than expectation in both the pass protection and the run block. This is really an interesting case for Schottenheimer of how well can he call a game, because this Denver Broncos defense is gettable despite the pressure. We have seen them get beat over the top a few times. We have seen them in coverage kind of have some vulnerabilities where, Pat Surtain, was the defensive player of the year last year, but the guy can't be everywhere. And you can still beat a defense without throwing the ball over the top. Again, playing that possession style, playing that take everything short over the middle, but keep the chains moving, keep the clock running. I think Dallas is going to be just fine at that. And I don't think the Denver Broncos have themselves a quarterback. We kind of got lightning in a bottle last year where Sean Payton implemented his new offense, right? We were curious if he was going to be okay as a modern coach. Was his offense going to translate into the modern NFL? The answers were yes. Bo Nix played better last year, right? We don't need to, say that he was never playing okay. He did play fine last year, but he was, he has a ceiling and it's not super high. He is only serviceable at best, and I don't think that he's a franchise quarterback by any means. And, he's probably a low-end starter, but when you have a team like the Broncos with weapons offensively, a good scheme, a good coach, and, a great defense, it's disappointing to watch Bo Nix have to throw the ball every week. I think the team's going to, limit themselves by not having a quarterback that can command the offense as well as they could or as they should. And I don't think Dallas should be 3.5 point underdogs to Denver. I think you get a lot of game states where Dallas is able to score the ball. Dallas is going to be able to keep the ball up the middle. And again, dealing with Denver's pressure, this is an interesting clash for for both sides, right? Where Denver is getting pressure at basically historic rate, right? Like sustaining a 40% pressure rate is really difficult in today's NFL. And Dallas, who is beating expectation a lot on the offensive line, again, both in protection and in run block. Are these two going to kind of clash against each other, right? Are we going to see regression from the Denver pass rush? Are we going to see regression from the Dallas pass protection? Or are we just going to find out that the Denver pass rush is that good and they just beat that protection for Dallas? Or is Dallas's protection that much better than we projected? And they're going to be able to handle the pass rush that they get from Denver. I'm really, we're going to ask Dak Prescott to do a lot. I think this is a game that you look at CeeDee Lamb on the receptions, right? I think playing from the slot, you're going to get quite a few short passes. Jake Ferguson, I think you're also going to get a lot of looks there. I mean, he's usually lined at like 6.5 catches anyway. But again, we'll run those numbers when we run the prop model later in the week. But I'm leaning towards overs on both those guys' receptions, and I'll take a look at those lines and post in the Discord if we end up playing something. But for now, I'm sticking with Dallas plus 3.5. I think it's a good look. I think there's a lot of game states where Dallas is super competitive in this game, and I'll probably end up playing a little bit of money line as well. And that's going to do it for the Week 8 episode of the Noise Podcast. Thanks again so much for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and subscribe. Thanks again for listening. Remember, the Discord is in the description of any of these, whatever medium you're using. And if you don't like any of those, remember you can always follow us on Instagram at thenoise.media. Links to Discord are also on my Instagram. That'll do it for Week 8. Thanks so much. This is Max Gilson. Godspeed.